Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this live stream. Today we're going to be discussing missionary activities in Africa. Now, this is a very interesting topic. We're going to be doing a series of talks on this. And just as a sort of background, Adnan has been going to Africa for the best part of the last decade, all over Africa. And he is currently working on some major projects there. So the idea is, before we get into what the work in Africa, the actual work that's taking place, what we want to do is give a backdrop of how did the missionaries go to Africa, what did they achieve, and how is it that they managed to, in a very short span of time, change the situation. And in particular today, we're going to be speaking about David Livingstone, who's a very well-known missionary from, I believe, the 18th century and or the
19th century.
19th century, right? And Adnan is basically going to be explaining about his influence in Africa, what he actually did, the movement he actually led to, and in particular, and this is very important, what we as Muslims can learn so we can use this to our advantage in terms of advancing the message of Islam in the continent of Africa, inshallah. So over to you, Adnan. We've had a few discussions about David, and you could start us off on your sort of take on his life.
I think let's make it an interview and you can ask questions that interest you
Sure,
and then we can take it from there, inshallah ta'ala. Instead of me doing a monologue talking about a personality for, let's say, 10, 20 minutes, that can
sure.
actually sometimes go on for long without being any questions asked. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's fine. I mean, we both, you're definitely more aware of his life than I am. I've just seen a documentary on his life, and I did a bit of just, it actually started off when you mentioned him a few years back. So before we get into even the interview, what I mentioned earlier, so you've been to Africa for the best part of the last 10 years. Could you just briefly explain the countries you visited, and what you were basically doing there?
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I've been in and out of Africa since 2011. For the last decade, I've been to many, many countries, including South Africa, Mozambique, Botswana, Namibia, and Malawi, also Tanzania, Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, and many other countries, of course.
Yeah, and we traveled to Nigeria together as well.
Yeah, Nigeria, of course, I've been to Nigeria, yes. So, all these countries I visited for the purpose of dawah, for the purpose of establishing dawah teams or supporting already existing du'at, people who are calling to Allah in these countries. Islam is very well established in the countries I've already mentioned, and in some countries, Islam is not present when it comes to dawah. There are Muslim businessmen, Muslim people living in all these countries in some capacity, but dawah is not necessarily established in all of these countries. There is dawah in most countries, but not all. So the purpose was to establish dawah teams and encourage brothers who are already doing dawah and to understand the situation in Africa so that we can help support the dawah missions already taking place in Africa.
Absolutely. Jazakallah khair for that. Now, we were speaking earlier, and as the weeks go on, we're going to go into your sort of library and the books that you have on missionaries and missionary works, going back as early as 2011. We basically had a discussion going back, if you remember, in November, December time, 2011, in which we were talking about Africa and the work there. So you're very well aware of the missionary activities, and you've spoken about this quite a few times. However, whenever you mentioned the works of the missionaries in Africa, you would usually begin off with Livingstone, right? So tell us why you singled him out as a person of interest, as opposed to the thousands of other missionaries you could have pointed out.
The reason for that is David Livingstone was one of the first explorers of certain parts of Africa. Of course, there were people in Africa before Livingstone. People had crossed Africa as a continent before Livingstone, but Livingstone became famous for it. He was more famous for his exploration than his missionary work, because as a missionary, he didn't get much success. And he was initially sent as a missionary, as someone to collect as to collect data from Africa. So what he started to do was he went to Africa. He started with Southern Africa and he made his way northwards so that he can find routes for the future missionaries, people who may be thinking to join him in the future or follow his path or follow his example. So he started to look for routes for not only for commerce but also for missionary activity. So he was a proponent of not only missionary activity but also for scientific investigation, imperial reform, and anti-slavery activity, and he was an advocate of British commercial and colonial expansion. So he was a number of things. He was not only a missionary; he was an explorer. He was an imperial agent, you can say, someone who was looking for ways to colonize Africa so that Africa can be civilized. He had three basically mottos for Africa, right? Christianity, commerce, and subhanallah, I forgot. Christianity, commerce, and
Civilization.
sorry,
Civilization.
civilization. Absolutely, thank you for correcting me there. So,
I actually learned that from you a few years back.
yeah. So he had three things in mind. So he worked against slave trade, whether it was Arab slave trade or Portuguese slave trade. He worked towards abolishing it completely, and he tried to find alternative solutions for the Europeans. So he was heavily influenced by two individuals in particular. Number one was Robert Moffat. Robert Moffat was also already a missionary who had visited Southern Africa, and
Okay.
Livingstone. Yeah.
So, sorry, before we get to Moffat, and that's a very interesting piece of history, you've highlighted something I think that's of interest that we need to just delve into a bit further. You
Mhm.
mentioned him not only as a missionary, but somebody that was bringing civilization, or according to him, business and these types of things. So I wanted to highlight a statement of his, because this really puzzled me, and you can explain it in light of what you just said.
Mhm.
So he said, "All I can add in my solitude is, may heaven's rich blessing come down on everyone, American, English, or Turk, who will help heal this open sore of the world." So here he's referring to Africa. Now, this
Right.
is very hard to explain from purely a missionary perspective, this statement. But from what you've said prior, maybe you can shed some light onto this statement.
About what in particular?
Where he mentions the American, English, and the Turk. And of course, the Turks, the Ottomans, were Muslim. So it
Yes.
seems, according to this statement, he's just not speaking about Christianity when it comes to Africa.
No, he was mainly concerned about Christianity. He started with London Missionary Society. He was employed by London Missionary Society in 1840s, so to go to Africa and conduct missions in Africa. There were already missionaries in Africa, right? Where he went to a missionary station. There was already a missionary station, an establishment for the Africans. So these people, some British missionaries were already proselytizing Africans, right? So he went to an already established center or station, if you like, right? So his purpose was very clear in his mind. He was going as a missionary employed by London Missionary Society. Even as a youngster, as a youth, if you look into his life, he was born in the city or town of Blantyre in Scotland. He was born into this mill town. I mean, there was a cotton mill, and he was working in this mill for 12 hours a day. He lived a very, very hard life, right? Then he was an avid reader. He started to read books. He realized that he needs to study medicine in order to support his missionary ambitions. So he convinced his father that he wants to study science, in particular the science of medicine, so that he can support his missionary work. It will help him. And his focus initially was China. He wasn't even thinking of Africa initially, right? And he was planning to head out to China, but in 1839, the opium wars between China and Britain started, right? So he had to postpone, and eventually, having been inspired by Robert Moffat, he decided to go to Africa because Moffat had already visited Africa, Southern Africa in particular, South Africa, today current day territory, South Africa. Moffat had already published a book on his journeys, which I have, I think, somewhere in my library. So Robert Moffat was his, when it comes to a missionary activity, was his inspiration. Another inspiration he had was uh, Buxton. Okay, this is basically T.F. Buxton, who had already written a book on African slave trade. In 1839, the first edition was published. This is the time when Livingstone was active in London studying medicine with his missionary ambitions. So, not only Robert Moffat had delivered a lecture in 1840, which Livingstone himself attended, there was another person who was writing on African slave trade, and Livingstone was driven by these two main ideas to visit Africa. One was to establish missionary stations in Northern Territory, which hasn't been yet explored because the Europeans had only gone so far in Africa, and the unknown territory wasn't yet explored. So Livingstone, when he got to his station in Southern Africa or South Central Africa, you can say, okay, he started to make his way up north, and he traveled with the river Zambezi, right, to find routes for future missionaries and for any commerce prospects, and to see how he can actually tackle the issue of slave trade. And even when it comes to slave trade, his main uh, his main interest in slave trade was because of his Christian uh, ideas. He was a Christian. He was against chattel slavery. Of course, as we know the history of Europe, for the last nearly 400 years, Europeans had been enslaving Africans, taking Africans from West Africa all the way to the Americas, putting them to work in sugar plantations and other things. And from 11 to 100 million people were taken across the Atlantic, kidnapped from Africa, and worked to death in many cases. And others survive to this day. I mean, their descendants, of course, not slaves. The descendants of those slaves survive to this day. People we call Afro Americans in the Americas. So he was an anti slavery activist as well. He was inspired by some of the earlier examples like William Wilberforce, Thomas Clarkson, and he was, of course, a contemporary of people like T.F. Buxton, who had written this book titled African Slave Trade. So these were the reasons why he ended up in Africa. But he became known more so as an explorer than a missionary, right? He also collected data on science. He was an avid student of science as well, so he was interested in those things as well. But his missionary profile was hyped later on to give him that status of a hero in Victorian Britain to inspire other missionaries to basically follow his footsteps. So even though he was more of an explorer, he was hyped as a missionary with specific ends in mind, especially by the missionary societies of Britain at the time. So his example was used. His how can I put it? His heroic myth was created. Okay, and once he was attacked by a lion when he was trying to help um, a village in Botswana, in current day Botswana territory. There was a village that was facing a problem with lions because lions were attacking their cattle. So Livingstone decided to hunt one of the lions so that other lions can be basically scared, and they would simply leave this cattle alone. So Livingstone shot a lion. So the story goes, the lion was injured, but not injured enough for him to, go away. He attacked Livingstone. Livingstone was injured severely in his left arm, and his left arm was damaged permanently. He couldn't lift his left arm beyond his shoulder. So these are the kind of things that were hyped in Victorian England. Images of Livingstone being attacked by a lion were widespread they were on matchboxes, they were on different things, so that his example can be glorified. He can be basically seen as a hero, as a mythical figure, as a son of Christ, if you like, working the do work, working sorry working for the Lord, or doing the work of the Lord in Africa, taking the message of Christianity to Africans. So his example was hyped. He was used as an example to inspire other missionaries, and this worked amazingly. This worked. In fact, he was one of those people who he was one of the first Europeans who uh, came across certain monuments or certain places in Africa, including the Victoria Falls. He was the first known European to have gazed upon Victoria Falls, and he was the one who called this fall Victoria Falls, even though it had a local name at the time. He called it Victoria Fall, or Victoria Falls, because Queen Victoria was ruling at the time in Britain. So he dedicated the falls to Queen Victoria. The native name of the falls was Mosi Owa Tunia, basically the smoke that thunders. The smoke that thunders. So I have had the privilege to visit this particular place not long ago. I was in Zambia, and I was taken by our local brothers to look at the falls. And there is a monument dedicated to David Livingstone overlooking the falls. So a monument has been put in his name. So David Livingstone was definitely a great explorer. He found new routes, and he even traversed territory which wasn't uh, looked at by any European before. But as a missionary, he was not a great success. There was nothing. There was nothing major as as a missionary he had done that deserves attention. But he was hyped. Definitely, as a missionary, he was hyped. He died in 1873, and his dead body was taken back to Britain, and his myth was created thenceforth. Many biographies were written. You see, this was a very vibrant period in Victorian Britain. A lot was happening in the second half of the 19th century. Indian Mutiny happened in 1857. Many heroes were created then. Then there were missionary explorers. Then there were people like Gordon Pasha, Gordon, who was killed in Sudan fighting the armies of Mahdi. His myth was created. Then there were many other missionaries who had traveled through India into South America or in the Americas, taking the message of the Gospels into these lands. So all of these missionaries were hyped. Their myths were created throughout Victorian England. And what that did was that inspired a lot of young missionaries uh, going to places like Africa. And then came the colonial powers to back them, to support them. And a lot of these missionaries were actually um, they were agents as well. They were, you can say, they were spies also at the same time, because they were providing information to the colonial establishments, because they saw colonialism as a solution to African barbarity. You see, Africans were seen as uncivilized barbarians, right? Jungle people who need to be civilized. And the only way to civilize them is to colonize them, and then bring the religion of Christianity, and then will follow civilization. This is the view they had. And that's why many missionaries who went to Africa had this view that Africans must be colonized for them to be Christianized, or for them to become Christians, and then they will become civilized some subsequently.
Sure. And just on that point, Adnan, and I think this is very important to highlight, and you've said this previously as well, about the link between colonization and also these missionaries. And at the same time, if we look at Livingstone's life, and this gives us a insight into the way that these missionaries thought, he was very rigid with the way that he treated the Africans. So, for example, there was a tribal leader. There's a documentary online which covers this. But anyway, there's a tribal leader who converted to Christianity, but in Africa, the culture is polygamous, right? It's having multiple wives, and then because he was,
Chief Sechele. I think you're talking about Chief Sechele.
ah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
and then he refused to. I mean, he went back to polygamy. So in a way, he left Christianity and then he went to somebody else, right? Previously he focused on this tribal leader and then someone else. So, this idea, when Islam comes to a culture, Islam doesn't come and demean the culture and say to the culture that you are beneath us. It basically adapts to the culture the things which are positive in the culture. And if you go to Malaysia, if you go to Afghanistan, if you go to Turkey or Sudan, you'll find Islam, but then you'll find the people's culture is still there. Here, it feels like, and the more I'm looking into missionary history in Africa, it feels almost like the colonial powers, who themselves weren't that religious, they felt like if we can civilize the Africans through these religious subjects of ours, the missionaries, these subjects are going to be more likely to be loyal. And this is what it feels like what they were doing in India as well. They had a long-term strategy to spread Christianity because Christians are going to be way more likely to follow the British than the Hindus, the Sikhs, or the Muslims. Would you say that's a right analysis, or is that a bit
You see,
broad?
uh, I I I think India was different to Africa. In India, the East India Company was a business entity, and it was the East India Company that colonized India initially, and later on in the mid 19th century, after the Indian Mutiny, the British government directly took control of India. You see, so the East India Company wasn't necessarily interested in changing the religion of the Indians, so long as they had their business going, so long as they made money. While the missionaries felt very, very frustrated by the activities of the East India Company, because the East India Company wasn't really interested in the missionary activities. In fact, there is evidence that the EIC um, discouraged missionary activity because it was getting in the way of the business, right? But when Britain or the British government took control of India after the Indian Mutiny, that's when missionary activity was already picking up. There were many missionaries who were in favor of the British government taking control from the East India Company, so that the missionary activity can be funded, can be supported by the government apparatus. And this is what happened. By the mid 19th century, the missionary activity was already taking a different form altogether. And one can look into the Agra debates between uh, a German missionary called Fander, and Sheikh Rahmatullah Kairanavi and Dr. Wazir Khan. These debates are called Agra debates, and Avril Cameron, she's a scholar from SOAS. Actually, she taught me as well on Mughal history. She has written a paper on this. Avril Cameron is her name. She has written uh, some works on this particular episode of Indian history, whereby missionaries were in conflict with Muslim scholars, debating them because of the support coming from the government, right? So Africa was a completely different matter altogether. Africans were seen in different light, while the Indians had some sort of civilization in the eyes of the Europeans, because they were Mughals behind the Indians. You see, the Europeans initially were heavily inspired by the Mughal culture, the Mughal language, the Mughal power, for that matter, the Mughal civilization, Mughal monuments. So when the East India Company started doing its business in India, it was completely blown away by the Mughal splendor, right? So it didn't really think of the Mughals as inferiors, right? In fact, in the 18th century, there are examples where um, Europeans adopted Mughal culture, and William Dalrymple has written a book on this topic, and his book is titled The White Mughals. In this book, he talks about many examples of people, British East India Company workers adopting Mughal ways. But it was only later on, after the writings of philosophers like John Stuart Mill, Thomas Paine, and others who were utilitarian philosophers, and they gave a sense of superiority to British colonialists, and they became racist, they became racialists, they became basically very, very haughty. They adopted the sense of pride in their European culture, European religion. So they started to see Islam and Hinduism as inferior cultures, inferior religions. They started to see Indians as an inferior people. And it had partly to do with the decline of the Mughals and the political power. But Africa wasn't like that. In Africa, the Europeans saw Africans immediately as an uncivilized, barbaric people living in jungles who need to be civilized. And the only way to civilize them is simply colonize them and change their religion and civilize them as a consequence. So the way the colonial powers viewed Africans was very different to the way they viewed the Indians. You see, so this was the reason why colonial powers, had this very radical system in Africa. They came in, they took the land, and they started to convert people using different means. For example, they used the schools, they used their medical facilities, they used their government influence. And there is a book titled Scramble for Africa. I don't know if you have seen that book. There's a very, very good book. It is titled Scramble for Africa. This book will document how the European powers, they went on a land grabbing mission in Africa, right, with a civilizing mission in the mind. But civilizing of Africans was actually, it became a secondary goal. Primary goal was to take the land and occupy the resources.
Yeah. And the way you explained about the link between the missionaries and the empire, right, is very interesting, because what we also find is, in the example of Livingstone, instances where basically the British government bailed him out. So there were times that he needed money. He went back to Africa. They supported him. He got support from, sorry, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was not the British government, but the one of the societies to do with exploration. And
Yes.
it may
He,
also
he,
have been the British government. Maybe I'm getting confused between.
yeah, he resigned. He resigned as a missionary from London Missionary Society uh, in 1857 because some people were of the view that he's not actually doing missionary work. He is doing other work.
Right.
And London Missionary Society didn't want to be accused of funding missions that are not directly related to missionary work. So Livingstone had to resign in 1857, the year when he wrote the book. In fact, when he came back to Britain, having conducted some earlier missions, when he came back to Britain in 1850s, he wrote his very famous book, Adventures in Southern Africa,
Yeah.
and it was published in 1857. One of the reasons he wrote the book was to actually be independent of any financial restraints so that he can continue his work. So it is true that he was supported and funded by other societies and he did the work for them because, as I said earlier, he was not necessarily a successful missionary because he failed as a missionary. He converted one chief to Christianity, and even that chief went back to his old ways. But he
Yeah.
definitely succeeded in exploration. He did come up with some information on African territory that wasn't traversed before him
Yeah.
by any European, no doubt.
And there's something else, Adnan, which stuck out for me when it comes to Livingstone, which is his dedication as a follower of Christ, as a Christian who really believed in the message. So we find this earlier in his life when he was in Blantyre, and also later on. Now, that faith of his, he used to basically keep him going in these difficult times. He got sick and he had all these types of these issues. And credit where it's due, you can see that, look, he's trying to spread Christianity to these people because he believes it to be the right thing. However, normally missionaries are associated with activities which in a way are quite immoral, right? I mean, there's a lot of horrific things we get in Africa about the way that missionaries trick people nowadays to converting, and how they basically get Muslim children, they get them to go to these schools, and they basically are, raising them up as Christians without their parents knowing. All these types of very deceptive and very evil tactics that missionaries employ. And you find that, he's using just his mouth, he's using just the message of Christ, and the message of Christianity, and he gets very little results. And when you compare that with the missionaries that came later, which are using incentives, and they are using all these things to bring people in. And as we've seen directly in Africa just a few days ago, when we were talking about, they would go and they would, buy people out, right? And they would do all these types of things. Do you sometimes find that missionaries who, they want to show the iconic missionary, people like David Livingstone, who really believe in the message and in a way are quite moral, right? In terms of, he was anti-slavery and he cared about the Africans and he didn't do any of these things. And then they call themselves missionaries in the same light, but in many ways, their results are not the result of the message. Is a lot more devious tactics, right? So I think it's important that just because his life is that of hard work and dedication, that doesn't mean the missionaries of today are moral in the same way.
Uh, to be honest with you, I don't think David Livingstone was a model of morality himself, because he, again, was a proponent of colonialism. He did believe in colonizing the Africans to civilize them. So he did have some sense of superiority over the Africans, even though he felt very sorry for the Africans and he sympathized with the Africans, no doubt, because he worked as an anti slavery activist. But at the same time, because he was an imperial agent, he was an activist who was actively promoting colonialism in Africa, and this is one of the reasons why he was exploring all that land. And to highlight something important, missionaries before him and missionaries after him always used evil tactics to spread their religion. Right? Uh, it's not that David Livingstone stood as a moral um, anchor in the middle and he tried to change how missionaries work. No, he didn't do that. In fact, missionaries working in different places at different times use different tactics to attract different people, using their culture, their languages. How missionaries worked in India during the colonial period was slightly different to how they worked in Africa. And when we go to South America, how missionaries worked with the natives was again another issue altogether.
Right.
So missionaries have always used evil tactics, lies, and deceptions to convert people. And where lies and deceptions did not work, they would use force, using the governments, for example.
Or
Right?
even like recently, what we've experienced in Africa, they would go and say to people where the du'at are working that these people worship Satan, and they just spread
Yeah.
absolute lies. We
Yeah,
see these
these
sort of people.
absolutely, they will lie against Islam. They will make up things in places like Malawi, for example, or other African countries in Southern Africa. If the missionaries come to realize that Muslims are working in an area, they will go and they'll start spreading lies through the churches. They will basically confuse the masses. They will deliberately, and in fact, this backfires. What they don't understand is this backfires on them, because when people come to realize that these are simple lies told by the missionaries and the agents in Africa, the local agents, um, they convert to Islam as a result, because they know, firstly, they know the loose characters of the missionaries and the pastors in these countries. So the characters of these pastors and missionaries don't attract the Africans, generally speaking, right? And this is one of the biggest reasons why people are converting to Islam in Africa, because they see Muslims as cleaner in character and in preaching. Okay, what the Muslims are preaching is better, and how they behave is better. When they look at the pastors, they drink. I'm not generalizing, but this is a widespread problem in Africa I've come across. Pastors drink, they womanize, they take money from people, right? And they,
But by the way, just on this point,
yeah,
the wealth of pastors, I think you need to highlight this because this is something that is just unbelievable in Africa. And it's such a poor continent, and you get a
Yeah,
lot
yeah,
of
yeah. The second richest man in Uganda is a pastor. I mean, there are some billionaires, pastors, billionaire pastors in places like Nigeria, right? They have private jets. So how does a pastor become so rich? Because the church he's using to collect money is basically, and in fact, look at these televangelists in the U.S. It is a multi-billion dollars business. Some of the richest organizations in America are churches, right?
yeah.
Televangelists, people like Billy Graham, and back in the day used to be Jimmy Swaggart,
Oh
who
yeah.
was yeah,
Oh
who
yeah.
was dealt with in a debate by Sheikh Ahmad Didat. So this back and forth between missionaries and Muslim du'at will continue for unknown, unforeseeable future, right? This
Yeah.
will continue. But the point is, the missionaries continue to use evil tactics. Okay, Livingstone used simple tactics because there was hardly any competition when he went to Africa. But even then, he failed as a missionary. Even
Yeah.
then, he failed as a
So that's
missionary.
that's the point I wanted to highlight, Adnan, that
Yeah,
when somebody goes to Africa and they go to try and explain a message which is in a way, you know, quite difficult to grasp, that God has a son as opposed to God is one, right? Then when you just use that message and you go up to people, the results you're going to get is the same results that we get from Christian missionaries who are shouting in speaker's corner. No one listens to them. But when you see the same people with the same message go and they are going to build a school, build a hospital, raise children. I mean, just as a point of interest, when I first started giving dawah back in 2010, the brother who taught me, and he was at the dawah stall in Kingston, he's a great brother from this organization called Muslim Outreach, and he's from Uganda, and he's a convert to Islam. And he told me that in Uganda, what happens is that they get the children to pray to the Prophet Sallallahu or Allah, and to ask for sweets, and they get nothing. And then they say pray to Jesus. And when they're praying to Jesus, then when their eyes are closed, somebody throws sweets from a window and the kids pick it up. He told me this is what's happening in his country, right? And he's somebody who's got, I'm not going to say his name, but he's got Christians in his family, him being the only Muslim convert. And he's very passionate about dawah. But these things are seen everywhere. There's so many examples, even in the chat as we're speaking, Adnan. I don't know if you're keeping an eye on it. There are people who are saying, like, there's a brother who said earlier that he works in some things, some dawah projects in Africa, and he's saying these are the evil sort of things that he's seen as well. So it's very easy that we see this, that this is prevalent. And therefore, if Christian missionaries are going to brag about, Africa is now pretty much the home of Christianity, when previously the only place that you had Christianity in Africa was Egypt and Ethiopia, then we would reply, well, look at the results of Livingstone, right, and compare them with others, and clearly it's not the message. There's something else which is the cause
yeah.
of
It
the.
it, it was colonialism. It was colonialism. Africans did not convert to Christianity. Uh, Africans from sub-Saharan Africa. They did not convert to Christianity because Christianity is more convincing. They only converted because there were no other options. There was no Muslim dawah. No one else was preaching, and colonial powers had taken all this land, and they were actively forcing the Africans to accept Christianity. Let me explain how they forced the Africans. Schools were established, so any you know parent would like their children to be educated and be like the Europeans, because Europeans came across as civilized, as sophisticated, and they had weapons, they had gadgets, they had power for that matter. So the idea was that if you want to become like them, then go to the institutions, learn in their institutions.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
Africans sent their children to schools. It were the schools that changed the religion of people, the children. The children, you see, the older generations were completely ignored. They did not convert to Christianity. What people don't realize is that the older generation, the first generation that sent its children to schools, did not convert to
yeah,
Christianity. They were simply stuck in their own ways. They were traditional. They're following traditional
African religion.
religions or cultures, right? But they didn't mind sending their children to school, and they didn't care about the religion they follow, right? So the missionaries who were teaching in these schools specifically focused on changing the religion of these children, converting them to Christianity. So when missionaries had the chance to teach these children for 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, whatever, these children came out as fully trained Christians. So schools were used to change the religion of people. It is happening today. I mean, it happened on a massive scale, on a continental scale after colonialism, of course. And Africa was not Christian 100 years ago. It was only the first generation that went to school in colonial schools. That generation converted to Christianity, right? And it's happening to this day, by the way. There are schools in Africa today in 2021. They will only accept people as students. They will only accept children as students when they change their names to Christian names, right? There is an orthopedic hospital in southern Malawi, in the city of Blantyre. It is a $200 million establishment, the best orthopedic hospital in southern Africa. It is a missionary establishment. When you walk in, you see a big poster on the wall, Jesus is Lord. And this area, the entire area, is a Muslim area. The city of Blantyre and its surroundings, this region is a Muslim region. Why would they put such a big establishment right in the heart of the Muslim region in southern Africa? The largest concentration of Muslims anywhere in southern Africa is in Malawi, in the Blantyre region, right? Why would they put this missionary establishment in the heart? Because they want these mothers bringing the children in. And then we interviewed one of the managers there, and he said unashamedly that we preach from the gospel to these Muslims who come in when they bring the children in. So obviously, it is but natural for people to have sympathy for these missionaries, because they're curing the children, they're giving them
Yeah.
medical treatment. At the same time, they're educating the children. So this is the tactic the missionaries have used for the last 150 years, and they continue to use it today.
Okay, so absolutely, no, Adnan. Obviously, we want to wrap up some things on Livingstone, but just before that, I have a burning question here. Now, there's something which I said to you previously as well a few days ago, which is an interesting correlation, that when missionaries go to certain areas in Africa,
Hmm.
their results are literally none, right? They get
Yes.
no results, right?
Yes.
So missionary activities against, say, Somalians or Sudanese or Egyptians or Moroccans
None.
or Nigerians or Hausa people is nil, nothing. But then when you get to Malawi and you get to certain regions, you do get those results. And it's not to do with poverty or wealth, even though the Hausa people are quite well off, but say other areas which are poorer, it seems to be that concepts like wala wal bara, concepts to do with understanding Islamic Aqidah, having a strong Islamic identity, they are weaker in places like Malawi, because maybe perhaps the Muslims that went there and taught people were not as, people weren't taught to the same level, or the knowledge was not retained to the same level as it is in Somalia and Sudan and Egypt and these other Muslim heartlands. So would you agree with this, and can you explain this a bit further?
100%. Missionaries have known this for centuries, or Christian establishments, that Muslims are not easy to convert. They are hard targets because the faith of Islam is very intellectually satisfying. It stands as a rival, spiritually speaking, to Christianity, right? And it is the fastest growing religion in the world. It has been for very long, more so in the 20th century and the 21st century than before, of course, because of Dawah movement, online and offline. So Dawah is very active. So for that reason, a lot of people are accepting Islam, and they are now hearing about Islam thanks to the social media, right?
Yeah.
The social media phenomenon. So this is clear. But missionaries have understood for centuries that Muslims are very difficult to convert because they are very attached to their religion. Their religion is a way of life. It is spiritually satisfying. Muslims find satisfaction. And for them to convince the Muslims about a God who consists of three persons from a God who is one person, one being, is a very, very tough task. Now, going to the sub Saharan Africans who are already uh, pagan in some form or some sense, right? They didn't have any such attachment to their culture apart from the, of course, I mean, putting aside the older generation. So they didn't really care about their children converting to any other religion. To them it is just another, you know, tradition. To them it's just another tradition. That's why they didn't mind sending the children to missionary schools and missionaries converting them to Christianity. If they had known that uh, the children are going to end up believing in the Trinity, or maybe a God who consists of three persons, they probably would have had their reservations, but they had no idea, right? The manifestation, as far as they were concerned, was civilization. Our children are wearing suits now. They are dressing like the Europeans, so they will become civilized like Europeans. So therefore, there's nothing wrong with this education. So that was the logic. This is why they were able to convert millions of people in sub-Saharan Africa, because they were not Muslims. They were following the traditional ways, and schools did the job. Schools funded by colonial powers using the money of the Africans acquired from Africa. All the
Yeah,
resources, all the money came from Africa, from the natural resources, okay, of Africa. That money was put back into Africa, establishing schools and hospitals, and these schools and hospitals did the job in
yeah,
150 years. That's the point.
yeah. And if you look at the stats, they're absolutely mind blowing. I mean, one statistic which the missionaries actually gloat about is that between 1885 and 2020, Christian population in Africa grew by 50 fold, 50
Yes,
times.
yeah, that's
Yet the,
true.
yet the population of Africa grew by sixfold. Another interesting statistic is that, again, between the same years of 1885 and 2020, is that the majority of Christians in the world in 1885 existed in the West. And today, the majority is no longer in the West. The majority is basically in Asia and Africa, and of course Latin America. So it's a lot more evenly distributed. So Adnan, going back to and wrapping up, because we're coming close to the hour mark. Going back to Livingstone, right? So Livingstone, in a way, was the trigger. He was the poster boy, that the poster man that they used to basically say, look at this guy, got attacked by a lion. Look at this guy. They brought him,
Christian martyr died in Africa in the path
died
of
in
Christ.
Africa.
He was lost, by the way. He was lost for a very long time. There was no news of him because he was basically lost in African territory, and he died in 1873. And then his body was transported back to Britain. It took his body 1 year to reach Britain, and then he was given proper protocol. He was already a hero before his dead body landed, and many biographies were subsequently written about him to glorify him. So he was a Christian martyr in that sense, and he was glorified beyond reality.
Absolutely. And I think you once mentioned about his heart being taken out once he died.
Yes,
And
yes, and his body was taken. It was kept in Zanzibar, in a house we have seen, and from that house, then his body was shipped back to Liverpool, where he was given, if I'm not mistaken, 21 guns salute by the then Victorian political establishment, and hailed as a hero. Immediately, I mean, he was well known already in Britain because of his incursions and exploration and the missionary work, which wasn't very successful, of course. But after he died, he became a bigger hero and a phenomenon than he was when he was alive, right? It
yeah,
happens very often. Heroes are created after they die.
yeah, and we see that, in a way, he's not just celebrated by Victorian Britain, and the establishment as a son of Christ, because they themselves weren't that religious, right? But as a colonial instrumental tool. I think this is
Yes.
also very important to understand.
Absolutely, absolutely. His name went down as an explorer who found new routes, for the colonial powers. And this is why many of these countries were colonized by Britain, right? Countries like Zimbabwe, for example, Zambia, right? Botswana, Malawi. All of this land was called Rhodesia, okay, Rhodesia, um, or Greater Rhodesia consisted of four countries, if I'm not mistaken: Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi. So all of this land was colonized after Livingstone's incursions, and this is an evidence in itself that Livingstone opened the doors for colonialism and much of the oppression that followed, economic and otherwise, and the conversion, the mass conversion of children, African children in schools, and the weight of the shirk they are committing to this day is on his shoulders. You see, all
Absolutely.
those people who end up in hellfire because of worshipping a Trinity, uh, the weight is upon his shoulders. He shares the burden, no doubt.
And conversely, speaking about what we really want to get across, and the reason why we're doing this live stream, which is not just to give you guys historical insights, it's actually to help raise awareness for where we have failed as Muslims. Because for centuries, Northern Africa was Muslim. The Muslims of the north did not give dawah to the Muslims of the southern regions, even in regions like, if you remember, when we were in Nigeria, we were in the Hausa region, in Abuja. If you remember, we were in that restaurant. We had all the brothers from the different organizations, and one of the brothers said that people wanted to convert, but we didn't receive them well because they were Hausa and stuff like this. So not obviously generalizing to all the Hausa people, but the one brother from the Hausa, people, that's what he said. And we get this, that Muslims were side by side with non-Muslims, with these indigenous people, and they could have protected them from shirk, and later on being exploited by the missionaries. Because remember, the Muslim regions of Africa are still wealthy, and it's the
Yes,
Christian regions which are subjugated and poor, and going through all of these extreme type
true,
of territorial
true.
issues as
It's
well.
very unfortunate if you look at these Christian countries in Africa. They have immense corruption, unfortunately. Many social issues. In particular, one issue in particular, if you were to take it, alcohol
Big.
consumption. It is one of the biggest problems in sub-Saharan Africa, right? It has simply destroyed families, lives, and economies in African countries, right? And how did this alcohol come? It came with colonial powers. It came with Christianity. I'm sorry to say this, yeah. It came with the Christian establishments that colonized Africa. They are the ones who brought alcohol, and Africans are still drowned in that alcohol. And I'm not generalizing. I'm not saying
Yeah.
all Africans are like that. I'm talking
You
about
know,
sub-Saharan. I'm talking about sub-Saharan Africa, so-called Christian Africa. Okay, um, you know, and look at the state of countries like Congo, for example, that was colonized by Belgium, right? Look at the state of countries like how countries are run and how
but
uh,
even to do with Malawi, I just wanted to add, Adnan, that when we
yeah,
were there back in 2013, when we were in those villages which were quite poor, the women were working in the fields. And if you remember, one of the villages we went to, the men were sitting around getting drunk. And
yes,
these are poor men, and the women are
yes.
working in the fields. Do you remember that?
And when I mentioned, I don't know if you remember, that Islam, if they accept Islam, it will solve the alcohol problem, and they all celebrated like crazy. And
Um,
I was shocked as to what did I say? What might have what might have I said that gave them so much excitement. And one of the sheikhs, he translated and he said, these people are happy because alcohol is a big problem for them. Women, they suffer directly as a result of alcohol consumption on the part of their men, because men are unable to work and women have to work hard to raise the families. Because and again, we're not generalizing, we're not saying all Africans are like that. There are hardworking Africans, perfectly decent men who control uh, who have full control of their affairs. But this is a big problem in countries like Zambia, let's say, or in
yeah,
countries like Malawi, in countries like Zimbabwe.
Yeah, and
It's a big
it's
problem.
like this, Adnan, that when we were in Blantyre or Ilongwe, you wouldn't see this so much as a problem, alcoholism. But as soon as you get into the village areas where people are very poor and, they don't really have much access to education, it's like giving a kid fireworks, right? So you introduce alcohol into these regions where people don't even wear shoes. People are extremely poor, and then this thing just spreads like wildfire. And if you remember, Adnan, that there was these, when you were giving the talk and people were accepting Islam, there were these people walking around with sticks with these little plastic bags, and these bags had 40% volume alcohol, which, by the way, alhamdulillah, we Muslims don't drink, but 40% volume alcohol is no joke. That's an
Mm,
extremely high toxic level, right?
mm,
And these sadly, these things in these poor villages are being spread around.
mm.
And not only this, when we're speaking about, and you can see this on the, if you go to Convivencia and you put that in Google, you'll see some of the videos in more detail in Africa. We're speaking about Tawheed. People accept it. It's speaking about, okay, in Islam, there's no zina. People love that. Even in Islam, there's no this, there's no that. So Islam fits with the African psyche. It fits well. They
Absolutely.
are people who have a lot of very good moral traits, and Islam
Absolutely.
comes, and then it's like light upon light, right? It's this beautiful synergy between those things. In Africa, you have this society which is geared around family. Many of the villages we went to, Adnan, no one would go hungry because the entire village ate together,
That's
right?
right.
You
That's
see,
right.
there's beautiful things there.
Yes.
But Christianity, and it's not Christianity, I should say, the way because we should make a distinction between the missionaries and their actions and the Christian faith. They would come in and they've spread these evil things, these megalomaniac pastors, sexual exploitation of women by these men. Then you get alcoholism with domestic abuse, with people economically suffering because of that. So all
Adultery.
these problems, yeah.
Adultery. I mean, unfortunately, adultery is another big problem, which causes many fatherless children to be born, and they suffer as a result. So it's a big problem. It's a big problem. Of course, adultery exists everywhere. There's no doubt, but in certain parts of the world, it is a lot more than other places because of the culture that came with colonialism. The colonial powers brought this culture and deliberately spread this culture, even possibly with the prospect of destroying people, you know, to do things that we cannot talk about in this
Yeah,
particular feat. Yeah.
no, no. Like I'll give you, I'll give the viewers an example that if you go to, say, a place like Somalia or Sudan or the other sort of Muslim regions, the Hausa regions, the northern Nigeria, you find strict families, the nuclear family with the husband and the wife and the children, and you find these things, and you find women covered, and you got this very strong culture. Even if you go to the indigenous African regions, right, where the people follow traditional African religion, you'll find a man who may be polygamous, he may have multiple wives, but you won't find in those village areas that there's zina and all this sort of crazy stuff happening. But in those uh, regions where the missionaries went, not only do you find the Lord's army or whatever the Christian name of these groups are, which are fighting each other, you get war, exploitation, the natural resources have been stripped away. I mean, Adnan, go to the Hausa region, the Muslim region, the resources are under the hands of the Muslims, who are the inhabitants of that region. You go to South Africa, it's the exact opposite. When Islam came, Islam built a masjid in which the Arab prayed, the African prayed, the white man, Chinese man, it's all equal. You go to the other Southern African regions, the Africans had to sit at the back of the church when they were allowed. Eventually, they decided to make independent black churches. Why? Because they were mistreated. And I'm not saying there isn't racism in the Muslim community. They can be, and there is. However, the extent to which we find this type of problems in the Christian regions, we do not in the Muslim regions, and that's at least something which the Muslims should be, using against the missionaries and
Mm,
telling the African Christians, why is it that you have all these social ills, and you have this faith that you don't even believe in, right? Because like you have been saying in many lectures and talks, you speak to an average Christian, right? Do they even know Christianity? They'll
No,
say, "Oh, I have a cross." Yeah,
no, they
they
don't.
probably don't even understand Christianity.
Most Christians in the rural areas of Africa don't know anything about Christianity. And when you ask them, do you believe Jesus is God? They say no. They tell
Yeah.
you straight, flatly, no, they don't believe Jesus is God. And I've had this experience many, many times in Malawi and other places where you ask the villagers, do you believe Jesus is God? They will say no. He's the Son of God. They will all say he's the Son of God, but they don't actually believe he's God
No.
because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't sit in with the inner disposition and with the fitra. It doesn't. The fitra doesn't accept it. Hence the necessity of dawah on that note.
Absolutely. And we're just coming to the hour mark, so we'll end there because I want to do a regular live stream, inshallah,
Inshallah.
in terms of Africa, the various works you have of missionary works, going over each region and what's to plan. But I did want to just give it over to you in terms of the Africa plan. I
Hmm.
remember you put together a long-term vision for what we as an ummah want to achieve in Africa. And obviously you've traveled a lot, so life is short. You never know, someone can watch this video 10 years from now and gain some insight. So just give us a brief overview of what we want to do in Africa and why all Muslims all across the world should be supporting these types of things.
The vision is to make sure that the message of Islam reaches every single village, every single home in sub-Saharan Africa. When I say sub-Saharan Africa, the non-Muslim Africa, let's say, Christian Africa, if you want to call it Christian Africa. And Islam is the fastest growing religion in Africa as we speak. Dawah is missing, so we need to continue doing dawah. And once we establish and organize dawah in these lands, actively going into villages like our teams go into villages, they preach to the people, people accept, and then we stay with the villages, educate them about Islam, the basics of Islam for a month, at least a month, if not more. If more is needed, then we stay more, so that the people can become practicing Muslims. They understand Islam, they appreciate the beauty of Islam, and once they become Muslims, they remain Muslim. Okay, we establish a masjid for them, we put a madrasa there so that the people can learn how to read the Quran, the children can learn how to read the Quran. And these people are coming to Islam by conviction, not because of schools or medical facilities we are providing for them. Rather, they hear the arguments, they hear the message, and they accept it wholeheartedly. They know this is the truth. Okay, maybe the missionaries went to Africa so that the people can come to believe in a view of God and then eventually come to Islam. So Allah works in mysterious ways. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put this land open for us so that we can go and do dawah. The only reason, brothers and sisters, Africa is still not Muslim is because we are not giving dawah to the Africans in the rural areas. I'm talking about the villages. I'm not talking about cities. City people have met Muslims, they know Muslims, they have seen Islam, right? But in the rural areas, Muslims have not given dawah. So once we start going to the villages, once we start organizing dawah trips and dawah missions to the rural areas of every single country in Africa, we will see results. We will see that people will turn to Islam, they will become Muslims, so long as we are dedicated and we continue the work. And if a group of brothers start the work and they have done their best, there should be another group of brothers who continue the work rather than leaving it to one group of people, and when they are unable to do it for whatever reason, then there is no more effort to continue the work. Look at these Christian missionaries like David Livingstone. He established an example, and then there was an influx of missionaries, of course supported and funded by colonial powers, no doubt. There was a lot of power behind them, but the Muslim Ummah is a power hub in itself. The Ummah can support our work once it gets to know what we are doing. So we are doing this work in Africa, Alhamdulillah, by the grace of Allah, so that others can see the example and continue it. If we leave it somewhere, if we die in the process, if we are not able to do it for whatever reason, right? If we are killed for, if we are killed in a plane crash, Allah forbid, or whatever, something like that, then there should be people to take the next step and go forward and take the message further. And don't stop until the message has reached every single village, every single house, whether it's made of bricks, mud, or cloth or hair, whatever the house is made of, as long as the message of Islam reaches these people, okay, don't stop. Until the message of Islam reaches these people, don't stop. Whether we exist or not, whether we do or not, whether we live or not, you must continue the work. And this is what we ask for. And once you go and see the work we're doing, you will see how to continue, because you can pick up from where we left if we leave. And we ask Allah to give us the tawfiq to continue until the day we die, and we will continue. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from us.
I mean,
Ameen.
Jazakallah khair. And Alhamdulillah, we have a lot of people who are watching this from across the world. Alhamdulillah, very happy to see people from Ethiopia, people from other parts of Africa, Somalia. So Alhamdulillah, the live stream has brought out a whole group of people. So we'll be live, inshallah, every week when Adnan's not traveling. He's usually, every month he travels roughly. So we're going to be going over various missionary works. Please post your questions and we'll be able to go
I
over
wanna
that.
I wanna very quickly say something. A couple of things actually.
Yeah.
A lot of
Yeah.
people are saying that I want to do dawah. I want to do dawah. Okay, look, treat dawah as you treat your education. Treat dawah as you treat your business. Right? For business, you will travel. You will get tired. You will sleep on the floor. You will do anything. Right? You will meet different people, and you won't get tired because you're making money as in return. Right? Uh, you will travel to far distant lands, right, to educate yourself. You will stay for 4 years, 5 years, 10 years in some cases, to attend a university so that you can get an education. For what? For your stomachs, for a career. Why do we not treat dawah like that? Why do we if the Muslim ummah, the youngsters around the Muslim world, start to take dawah as their business, as their education, like they put effort towards the education. Parents spend thousands of pounds and dollars towards the education of the children. Spend money like them for them to go on dawah missions. That will do wonders for your children. Okay, treat dawah like you treat your education, like you treat your BA, like you treat your master's degree, like you treat your PhD degree, because you will spend thousands of pounds and dollars to go and get an education and live in a foreign land, in an alien country, so that you can get this education for a career. How about going for dawah? If missionaries can go for their Trinity, for their false religion, okay, if missionaries can put their lives at stake for the last 150 years to spread their batil, to spread the lie of Trinity, why can we not put half that effort or even 10% of that effort to spread the haqq we believe in, to
Yeah.
spread the truth we believe in? This is what I'm asking the Muslim brothers and sisters to do. Okay, you want to do dawah, then treat it seriously. Treat it like your education. Treat it like you are doing business and you want to succeed. And when you do your dawah with this mindset that you want to succeed, you will make it work by hook or by crook. It will happen. It will happen. Become stubborn. Become stubborn. Become hardened for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you will see things happening, inshallah ta'ala. The reason why dawah is as it is, I mean, dawah is not happening as it should be on the scale we want it to happen, right? The reason for that is not enough Muslims are taking it seriously, like they take the businesses and the education seriously. So this is why we need to start looking at dawah. We need thousands of brothers and sisters, thousands, not hundreds. We need thousands of brothers and sisters to start taking dawah seriously. Pack your bags, go to African villages, coordinate with other teams and other dawah organizations. Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't go to the same place where people already exist. Rather, go to places where there's no dawah, and you will see people worshipping Allah, putting their head down for sajda, and they will be building mosques. We've had villages in Africa where people, after they became Muslim, they built the masjid with their own hands, with straw, with wooden planks. Okay, they put wooden planks as pillars and they made a roof of straw. I've seen masajid like that with my own eyes. Okay, they're not worshipping in the masajid like we have in Leicester, in Birmingham, in London, and in Washington D.C. or in Toronto or in the Gulf region. They are worshipping in masajid made of straw, and that sajda, Allahu Akbar. Imagine that sajda, how it weighs heavy on the scale. So I want you to go and do something about it, my brothers and sisters. Think business, think big, and Allah will use you, inshallah ta'ala. As long as you start thinking about da'wah as you think about your business and your education, the way you take your business and your education seriously, the way you wake up in the morning, 6 a.m., 7 a.m., 8 a.m. to go to your job and work for 9 to 8 hours for someone to make money out of you. If you start thinking about dawah like that, you will see things start changing in Africa and other parts of the world, inshallah ta'ala.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a wonderful message to end upon. We'll be live again, inshallah, next week to go over another angle from the missionary perspective. So until then, Jazakallah khair for watching. Assalamu alaikum wa